Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Handford, and my wife, Dennae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. On the podcast with us today is Chris Williams. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Chris, we really appreciate your time and energy spent talking with us today, and we're looking forward to our chat. We'd like for you to get started by talking to our audience and us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur and where your focus is right now.
Absolutely. So I actually have always been fascinated by entrepreneurship. I think when you look at entrepreneurship from the outside looking in, many people talk about, the results they've had eventually. And that was kind of the first attraction. I think the other thing that I learned very quickly was that there's a method to a lot of the madness as well. And so currently right now, what I actually do is I'm a keynote speaker. I also host my own podcast. And so as a keynote speaker, I focus a lot on organizational culture and do a lot of workshop and development training. Right now, I'm working with one large financial firm and doing a lot of their executive and coaching into agile methodology. So helping them learn how to be able to turn new teams and develop teams, but then also building the culture around that as well.
So if I understand you correctly, then you are helping entrepreneurs bring method to their madness or understand the method behind their madness?
Something like that. Big and small firms alike.
Well, I want you to get us started and talk to us first about a tough decision that I like to call the sore thumb tough decision. It's a tough decision that you had to make that was really difficult, and it didn't have the outcome that you desired. And it was actually not a very good outcome, but you learned a lot of lessons through it. And we want to talk through that tough decision and some of the lessons you learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I have so many. I think that, one of the ones that most people don't consider when they start their journey in entrepreneurship is the family impact. When I started my entrepreneurship journey, I was kind of still working my corporate career and starting up my business. And I was also newly married. And unfortunately, that marriage came to an end. And so I think that the first thing that was a tough decision for me was having to accept what was happening at the time, but also trying to decide, do I continue with my vision and what I've put out to do with my business? A lot of times, when you're faced with those types of situations and decisions, some people's businesses just completely fold and fall apart. And I had a decision to make. Do I keep my business running and try to salvage as much as I could of my relationship and salvage my marriage? Or do I let this thing go that I've been dreaming of trying to put together for years and only focus on that? And so that was probably the toughest decision that I've had to make so far in my life.
And what are some of the, high level, lessons that you learned through that?
Oh, I think as a man of faith, the first thing I had to recognize was that it's really important to be aligned with your spouse about the direction of where you're headed. And also, it's important that in that alignment, you give each other space to grow and learn, right? I'm sure, Dan, when you decided to do this, everything was not hunky-dory in the household. It was like, what are you doing? And why you want to do that, right? And then people start to get it, and then eventually it starts to come together, right? But you got to give people space to understand and grow. I think that was those two would probably be the biggest things that I think I learned from that.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really important points, and, it's about appreciating change and growth and understanding that, you married somebody, but, a lot is going to happen in the years that follow, and you have to be willing to give and take and grow. Mm-hmm. And there's just so many lessons to learn. And I mean, I guess maybe I should have known, but when we first got married, I don't think I understood the full impact of what being married to a business owner was going to mean.
Yeah.
And you learn to grow and how to deal with that and how to be flexible and change with that. But I also know that, Dan's learned a lot about helping me through those times of change, because I think entrepreneurs are naturally people that just sort of embrace forward progress. And whereas some people that are more like me, they just, we just like the status quo because it was really comfortable.
And I think you mentioned something interesting. So one of the learnings I had from counseling, and one of the things I will say to your audience, if you are struggling relationally and you're building your business, go to counseling. Don't wait. Don't wait until, if you smell smoke, there's a fire, right? So don't wait. But one of the things that you bring up is what I learned was two people coming together is one thing, but there's one person who's looking for stability all the time. And then there's another person who's got a little bit more of an appetite for risk. Right. Mm-hmm. And that person typically will be, wanting to look at other opportunities as opposed to just working a job. And I think what's really important is communication. And so if you have the communication, and to your point, as you mentioned, if you're willing to grow, right, then when those things happen, you have to be, as the entrepreneur person who has that spirit, has got to be able to communicate that I understand your need for stability. Right. I understand that this might cause some anguish, right? And a little bit of heartburn, right? A lot of heartburn sometimes. Right. All right. But, communicating the why behind that. And then for the person who's looking for the stability has to communicate support to the entrepreneur spouse, right? That, hey, I support you in this. What is it that we can do together? What things do we have to look at in order to be able to help you get to where you want to be? And those are things that, 2020 is hindsight, right? I think those are the types of things that I learned that were, really critical in that space and time.
And just another note for our audience that, I think is really, really important to understand is that once you get to that point and you understand your own strengths and weaknesses and you understand the other person's strengths and weaknesses, then you can come and work together and you could be a really, really good team because you have qualities to balance each other out. But if you can never get past what your own, I want stability, I want same all the time, or vice versa, you're the entrepreneur and you can't seem to grasp the fact that this person is begging you for some sort of stability, then if you can't ever get past those, then you don't make a team. You're just against each other.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's shift here and talk about a different tough decision, one that had a really good and positive outcome and some of the lessons you learned through that one.
So on December 31st of 2017, I learned that my mother had a massive stroke and brain bleed, and she was 3 states away. And so I had to drive down to be with her on New Year's night last year. And she was in the hospital for 3 months in Emory, in Atlanta. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was pretty interesting because at that time, my businesses were starting to, somewhat grow. We had a lot of momentum happening kind of coming into 2018. Well, thankfully, by April, she was kind of in a long-term care facility and finally was able to go home by the end of April. I started another stream of residual income in the middle of all of that. Traveling around the country with all the things that I was already doing. I was working on another business venture that I was working in. And so it wasn't a good time for me to start that business. And that was tough because it was an opportunity that was presented to me. First time, I think I turned it down. I said no. Nothing was going on at that time. And then it kind of came back up while I was going through all those things. And, it was a tough time, but I kind of put aside what I was going through. I learned from a good mentor of mine who always talked to me about, my emotions are just indicators. They're not dictators. So you have to learn how to set emotion aside to make the best judgments and decisions in life. And so I started that venture, and that venture ultimately ended 2018. I think I started that in March. It added another over $70,000 to my revenue stream. So it was an incredible decision to make, but I felt like it was the dumbest decision I made at that time as well because I couldn't see it.
What were some of the steps that you took to be able to increase it like that?
The first thing was, I'm a quote guy, so I'm sorry. One
That's all right.
I heard someone was, it's a sports analogy about systems beat talent any day of the week. And I found that to be true. I just found a system. And what I've learned from my mentors is that in life, and I don't mean like mentors that I can see physically. I read books about people that I may, who knows if I ever meet them, but I've just learned that there are certain systems that just work. If you take a sports analogy of the New England Patriots, people wonder why are they always knocking on the door of the Super Bowl? Because it doesn't matter who's playing. they've got a system. And if you learn to plug into that system, then everyone is successful. So I found the system and then we've been able to scale it. That's basically it.
Well, Chris, talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you use when you are facing a tough decision. How do you approach that decision, and how do you get to a point where you're ready to go forward in a direction?
So this one is tough because I think a lot of people will struggle with this, what I'm about to say. I have learned that it's not easy. I'm not saying this is easy. What I have learned is that when you are faced with a tough decision, pause. Don't make a decision right then. It's because, remember, as I said earlier, emotions are nothing but indicators. They are not dictators. And typically when we are faced with a tough decision, the first thing that comes up, and I study a lot of neuroscience about the brain. So the first thing that happens is our brain gets into save myself mode. And so we react to situations. And so we get a heightened sense of feeling. And then all of a sudden we've got all these things kicking off and these chemical processes happening in our brain. And so then we make rash decisions because of how we feel, whether we feel afraid or whatever that feeling that decision is making us have in the moment. And you have to pause. You really have to pause. And instead of reacting to a situation, learning to respond. Responses take time. If you look in the media, when a company goes through a big situation, right, and something bad happens, you never see them immediately make a statement. Why? Because they need to pause and think about what do they need to say. That's called responding. Reacting is what we see people doing, and we go, why would somebody ever do that in the moment? Well, all of us would. If we were faced in that situation without ever being willing to pause and think about what's the best approach to this. So that's what I would say. Be willing to respond instead of react.
I think that's great advice. And just as to kind of add on there, in almost every circumstance, when they react, what do? They just make it worse.
That's right. Yep.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and hear from one of our show sponsors. When we come back, we'll talk to Chris about his favorites as it relates to his life as an entrepreneur.
Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com. All right, we are back, and we're going through a series of quick questions and answers that we call the trifecta. And Chris, we want you to get us started by talking to us about your favorite technology that you use in business that helps to make your life easier every day as an entrepreneur.
Oh, my God. So the first one would be the very brand new 2018 version of the iPad Pro. I have not found yet, up until the iPad Pro, something that works with me on the go. I think everybody's kind of going through this maturation of technology and tablets and mobile devices, right? Where before you needed to carry around your big, laptop, right? And then it's terrible on a plane because the seats aren't that big.
I definitely have that problem.
Right. We want small, but we don't want too small, right? We want mobility, but we still need functionality, right? So we're kind of always in this back and forth. What I have found is, and I've tested this on my own, where I will literally put myself through a situation where when I'm planning my trips, I go, okay, what's the least amount that I can bring with me and still get the things done that I need to do? And so typically I am now down to an iPad and a phone, and I don't even need my laptop now. So it has become, I've had to learn. Yes, I've had to learn and figure out how I can get certain things done. But it has been a game changer for me, for sure.
What is a favorite quote that you've heard that's helped you as an entrepreneur?
I've got a few. I think it's the one that I just mentioned. Systems outweigh talent, because there's so much packed into that. But that would have to be my favorite one right now.
And what is one favorite book that you have read that's helped you make better decisions as an entrepreneur?
I think the first one would be Extreme Ownership, I think is what it's called. It is a really great book because it just helps people see that it's possible. It's written by a U S Navy SEAL, and how the U.S. Navy SEALs teams lead and win. And that's basically the tagline in the front of the book. And it's a really great read. If you're really interested in saying, I want to take advantage of what's in front of me, no matter whether I'm just, working within a job as an individual contributor or whether I'm at the top of my own corporation or you're an entrepreneur, I think there's something to be said about realizing that you're more in control of more things than you think, right? And so learning how to lead through extreme ownership it's a really great read.
What's the next thing for you right now on your vision or dream board, Chris?
So, and I'm staring at my board right now. The biggest thing is 2019, I have two major ventures that are happening. I started a non-for-profit for young men 18 to 23 who live in low-income areas to create exposure opportunities for them so that they get a chance to see themselves in better ways. And so in 2019, we're launching this venture. We're going to start out in 4 different cities around the country. It's a passion project of mine because of where I grew up. I grew up without a lot of exposure. I didn't know half the things that I know now. And to be able to give that back to young men who were in situations like I were, who grew up without a lot, and to be able to give them an opportunity to see something bigger than themselves and even the little area in which they grew up in now is a huge passion of mine. So that's a big deal for me in 2019.
I want to take some time to thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us today. How can the listeners reach out to you if they have further questions for you or want to connect with you further?
Absolutely. So I can be reached at chris@highlevelwisdom.com. That's chris@highlevelwisdom.com. And also I'm on Instagram, the Christopher Williams. Typically there, that's pretty much where my daily life is. Or you can find more information also on Instagram at the handle High Level Wisdom. So those are the best ways to reach me.
Well, Chris, again, thank you so much for being with us. Look forward to continue to follow you as an entrepreneur and, also having you on a future episode as you continue to grow.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.